Hello friends, how are you all? Welcome back. Myself Pushpendra Singh, and we are going to start with our current affairs. So today you have 10th of June 2021, and as you know that these lectures are basically useful for those who are preparing for the civil services examination. And for that purpose, we are referring the two national newspapers, the Hindu and Indian Express. You can also refer these two national newspapers, and you can supplement your preparation with the help of these lectures, as these lectures are entirely based on the current affairs for your examination. And you can subscribe our channel on the YouTube for these lectures. All right, so let's begin with the lecture. So first news is all about Ladakh. The Ladakh is basically a union territory which have been recently been emerged out of the Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act 2019. Okay, so recently, right, the Prime Minister's ambitious, the plan to make the Ladakh as a carbon neutral union territory. For that purpose, a Convergence Energy Services Limited, okay, which is a company, has signed a memorandum of understanding with the administration of the Union Territory of Ladakh, right, to make this Union Territory of Ladakh, right, a clean, greener, as well as the carbon neutral Union Territory in our country. So it's a very important step to make this Union Territory, which is a newly emerged in 2019 after reorganization of the Jammu and Kashmir, as a carbon neutral Union Territory. So here, this MOU, which basically signed, right, with the administration of the Union Territory of Ladakh, is basically related to the carbon neutrality. Here, various other projects will be implemented. For example, various clean energy and energy efficiency programs will be implemented, right, under this MOU. Okay, here under this MOU also there will be a plan for the setting up of the solar mini and the microgrid solutions, right, which will be providing the much needed energy services, energy solutions to some of those areas where the grid connectivity is not available. Okay, it will also be provided some sort of a energy efficient lighting procedure, right. It will also be having some sort of a procedure related to the storage based solutions, right, to store this energy, right, that can be used for the later period of the time. As well as it will have the plan to introduce the efficient cooking stoves and electric mobility solutions to the Union Territory of Ladakh. So here, the Convergence Energy Services Limited, right, that is CESL, is nothing but it's a wholly owned subsidiary of the Energy Efficiency Services Limited. It's a wholly owned subsidiary of the Energy Efficiency Services Limited. Okay, this Energy Efficiency Services Limited is basically an energy services company which totally belongs to the government of India. It's the world largest public energy efficient company in our country. It is 100% government of India owned. So you can say it's a joint venture of the state-owned NTPC. So this that we are talking about, that right, SL, that is Energy Efficiency Services Limited, is a 100% joint venture company that is owned by the government of India. The joint venture basically consisting of the NTPC, that is National Thermal Power Corporation Limited, which is a Maharatna company under the Ministry of Power. Okay, then Power Finance Corporation. This Power Finance Corporation is basically an Indian financial institution under the ownership of the Ministry of Finance. Okay, it was established in 1986. The main purpose is to provide the financial backbone to the Indian power sector. This is the second, the entity in this joint venture. The third entity in this joint venture is the Rural Electricity Corporation Limited, that is REC, right? So Rural Electricity or Rural Electrification Corporation Limited is nothing but a Navratna company that is again under administrative control of Ministry of Power. So this is the third such entity in the joint venture, and the fourth and the last is basically the Power Grid. The Power Grid, it's again a Maharatna company under the Ministry of Power. Okay, so these are the four PSUs which have set up this Energy Efficiency Services Limited, and what we are talking about, this Convergence Energy Services Limited, is a wholly owned subsidiary of this Energy Efficiency Service Limited. Okay, so under this, what we are talking about, this carbon neutrality. Okay, here the Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in his independence speech, the year of 2020, he says that the Ladakh, Leh, and Kargil region will be developed and it will be made the carbon neutral region, right? That will be the first in the country. So that we are talking about this carbon neutral region or the carbon neutrality. The carbon neutrality is referring to the net zero carbon dioxide emissions. Okay, So this can be done. How can you done this net zero carbon dioxide emission? Just by balancing. Okay, so you have to balance the emissions of the CO2 or other greenhouse gases which are removed, right, through some sort of a procedure, like you have the offsetting, right? You have the carbon offsetting, through which you will be eliminating those emissions from the society, right? So carbon neutrality is nothing but having a balance between the emitting carbon as well as the absorption carbon from the atmosphere in the carbon sinks. So removing this carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and then storing somewhere is also known as carbon sequestration, right? As you have understood this term also. Okay, so here the concept of the carbon neutral villages have also been considered in India, and government of India has also started moving in that direction. Already some of the villages in the Kerala and the Manipur have adopted, and this will be the first large region to be the carbon neutral, as those MOU which was implemented with respect to the union territory of Ladakh. Okay, so here the go carbon neutral, which will be to make this region carbon neutral. Okay. Next, Surakshit Hum Surakshit Tum Abhiyan. So here the Surakshit Hum and Surakshit Tum Abhiyan was launched by Niti Aayog with association with the Piramal Foundation. Have launched this Surakshit Hum Surakshit Tum Abhiyan in 112 aspirational districts. The main purpose of this Surakshit Hum and Surakshit Tum Abhiyan is, during COVID-19 pandemic, right? There are many patients who are basically asymptomatic or who have some sort of a mild symptoms, right? They are basically at their homes. So to provide this home care support, right? Here, the Niti Aayog along with the Piramal Foundation, right, with the association with the district administration, right, some sort of a home care support will be provided to those COVID patients which are asymptomatic or having some sort of a mild symptoms related to the COVID-19. So here this abhiyan would definitely help those people who have some sort of a asymptomatic symptoms related to the Niti Aayog. It's a significant initiative that responds to the immediate needs to the people, and that will provide the long-term support to the India's poorest communities in the aspirational districts, right? That we are talking about 112 aspirational districts, right? By addressing the lasting impact of COVID-19. Okay, here the aspirational districts. So here the government of India launched this program called the transformation of aspirational districts program. Okay, here these aspirational districts of 112 districts have been chosen to transform those districts. Okay, so this program that we are talking about, the transformation of the aspirational districts program, aiming at the convergence of the central schemes and the state schemes together, the collaboration of the various the concerned public officials like central government officials, state government officials, district collectors together, and the competition among the districts which are driven by the mass movement, right? And this program basically focusing on the strength of every district. Okay, where the districts are identified that require some sort of an immediate improvement, right? And the measures have been taken in respect to those strengths that belongs to every district, and then subsequently rank them accordingly based on those output. Okay, so this Abhiyan that we are talking is a part of the special initiative where the aspirational districts have been chosen. Okay, here the district administration will be supported with the help of the local leaders, civil society members, the volunteers, right, which works with the district administration, right, to address the emerging needs or emerging problems related to, right, the people which are basically having because of some sort of asymptomatic conditions related to the COVID-19. Here, it will led by the district magistrate or the district collectors in partnership of and all around 1,000 local NGOs that will be to also cater to the training of on and around 1 lakh volunteers. All those civil society members, 1 lakh volunteers, right? These 1,000 local NGOs who connect to the patients, right? Through inbound and outbound calls, and through these calls, they will provide the much needed support to those people who are asymptomatic or having some sort of mild symptoms, and will provide the much needed support to those people. Okay. Next is the National Scheme Sanctioning Committee of the Swachh Bharat Mission Gramin. So here that we are talking about the National Scheme Sanction Committee, right, of the Swachh Bharat Mission Gramin have approved, right, a plan called the Annual Implementation Plan with respect to the states and the union territory. Here, with respect to this Annual Implementation Plan, almost 40,700 crore rupees have been sanctioned or have been allocated under the Swachh Bharat Mission Gramin. Right, the main purpose of allocation of this 40,700 crore rupees is to provide much needed solutions for the solid liquid waste management, because in the rural footage, also in the rural settings also, the solid waste management, the liquid waste management is also at most importance, right? So here the arrangement is to be provided to support, right, to over 2 lakh villages in our country in the financial year of 2021-22 under the Swachh Bharat Mission Gramin for the providing of the solutions related to the solid waste management and the liquid waste management with the help of this financial allocation of the 40,700 crore rupees. Okay, so here the National Scheme Sanctioning Committee works under the chairmanship of Secretary, Ministry of Jal Shakti. Here the National Scheme Sanctioning Committee that we are talking, right, is basically was constituted under Swachh Bharat Mission Gramin, right, for the specific periods to approve or to revise, right, the perspective plan that is called the project implementation plan. Okay, for the districts, for the states, and as well as the annual implementation plan. Here, that is the annual implementation plan, right, as and when it received, right, and it will be approving those which are given by the states and the UT government, duly approved by the state level, the sanction committee, and finalized by the appraisal committee. So its main purpose is to approve or to revise this perspective plan or perspective implementation plan for the district and for the states, as well as this annual implementation plan for that purpose. Okay, so it also comprises of the representatives of the Ministry of Rural Development, Panchayati Raj, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, and the representative from the state governments, right, as the members, right, or as the representatives from those departments of the ministries. Here, the National Scheme Sanctioning Committee, that is NSSC, okay, would also review the plans of the states and the union territories and provided much guidance, right, definitely for the implementation of this sanitation and hygienic, those projects which are related to solid waste management, the liquid waste management, which are also paramount importance, specifically during the COVID-19 pandemic. So this hygienic, and the sanitation drive is also most important for that respect. Here you have, your Honorable Minister of the Jal Shakti, Shri Gajendra Singh Shekhawat, have said that recently that under the Swachh Bharat Mission Gramin, over 2 lakh villages will be supported with the help of around 40,000 crore rupees, right, in the financial year of 2021-22, and that will be making the open defecation free or ODF free, that makes some sort of arrangement for the solid waste management and the liquid waste management, that will make our villages also the open defecation free. Okay, next, the appointment of the election commissioners, right. Here, and you know that the election commission is basically a constitutional body. Constitutional body means it has been set up by the constitution, but the election commission is also a multi-member body. Multi-member body means it consisting of more than one members, right. So currently the election commission of India consisting of the one chief election commission, one chief election commissioners plus 2 election commissioners. So currently the election commission of India consisting of the 3-member body, that is 1 chief election commissioner and the 2 election commissioners. So recently, the Election Commission of India is in the news because the President Ram Nath Kovind have recently appointed the Anup Chandra Pandey, who is basically the retired IAS officer from the Uttar Pradesh cadre, as the Election Commissioner to the Election Commission of India. Okay, and he was elevated to the position of the Election Commission that was vacant since April 13th, 2021, this year itself. So here, the constitution provision is that under Article 321(2), right, the appointment of election commissioners, including the chief election commissioner, was done, right, by the President of India. So President of India has the power to appoint those election commissioners as well as the chief election commissioner under Article 324 clause 2. Okay, And here, the president can also fix the number of election commissioners. The point was that at the point of the time, right, in some point of the time in the history, you can also see that there was a single member body before 1990, but subsequently it was, made a, multi-member body. Here, the Article 324 Clause 2 also gave the power to the Parliament to legislate on the issue. Right? To legislate on the issue means the Parliament can fix the number of, the election commissioners that would be appointed, right, with the Election Commission of India. Okay, but here the President can fix the number of election commissioners subjected to the provision which are made by the which are made by the law, which are made by the Parliament. So here the Parliament has the power with respect to the fixation of the number of election commissioners with the Election Commission of India. If not, the president is free to appoint, number of election commissioners with the Election Commission of India. With the Election Commission of India, currently the president appoints the chief election commissioner along with the two election commissioners with the body called Election Commission of India. Okay, the procedure is that just like just like you have seen the collegium system, right, for the appointment of the judges of the Supreme Court and High Court, for the purpose of appointment of the election commissioners, including the chief election commissioner, there is no procedure of the collegium, right? There is no such the collegium procedure, right? Here, in the absence of any sort of a parliamentary law or any sort of a governing mechanism, right? Simply the election commissioners which are appointed by the government of the day, definitely with the help of the president. The president has the power to appointment of these election commissioners without having any sort of a consultation process. So that means there is no procedure of the collegium or no involvement of the opposition while appointment of these election commissioners with the Election Commission of India. The tenure of the election commissioners, including the chief election commissioner, is 6-year period. That means from the date they entered into the office, they will hold the office for the term of 6 years, or they will have to retire if the age is 65 years, whichever is earlier. That means if the person is appointed, let's say at the age of 62 years, okay, so that means he will have the term of 6 years or up to the age of 65 years, whichever is earlier. So that means here after 62 years he will have the just term of 3 years. That's all 3 years. He cannot hold the office for the term of 6 years because this is much earlier. So that's what whichever is earlier. So whichever is earlier occurring, the person will be appointed as a to that term only. Okay, the qualification, there is no prescribed qualification as such for the appointment of the election commissions, but the convention dictates that only the senior civil servants or senior IAS officers would alone be appointed as a as an election commissioner, including the chief election commissioner. Here to the rank of the cabinet secretary or the secretary to the government of India or the equivalent rank would only be appointed as a election commissioner, including the chief election commissioner. So here the person known as the Anup Chandra Pandey, who was recently been appointed as election commissioner, who is an retired IAS officer, belongs to the Uttar Pradesh cadre. All right. Next, the Central Adoption Resource Authority. The Central Adoption Resource Authority is nothing but an autonomous and statutory body, right, with the Union Ministry of Women and the Child Development. Okay, so this Central Adoption and the Resource Authority is given the power for the purpose of as a nodal body for the adoption of the children in our country. So a Supreme Court has directed. So what is the background for that news is that there are various NGOs and the private individuals which are inviting the people, right, to illegally adopt the children which are recently been orphaned because of COVID-19 pandemic. So what happens is, right, both of the parents of the children had died because of the COVID-19, and many children become orphaned, right? Taking benefit of the situation of these orphan children, right? Many private individuals and the NGOs who are basically working in the civil society have invited the people to adopt these children, right? Here the Supreme Court have recently been directed to the states and union territory to take stringent measures or to take the tough measures against such private individuals and the NGOs, right, which are inviting the illegally the people, right, to adopt the children because it is simply illegal, and such children may be exploited with the hand of these people, right? I know there's a lot of exploitation it's going on in our society. So if you are illegally handing over these orphan children to the strangers, definitely that will have repercussions on the children. Definitely without the involvement of the Central Adoption Resource Authority, which is a nodal authority for the purpose of adoption of the children in our country. Every such move will be tantamount to the illegal move, right? Okay. So here the Central Adoption Resource Authority is basically a nodal body for the purpose of adoption of the Indian children in our country. It's an autonomous and instituted body with the Ministry of Women and Child Welfare. Okay, it deals with adoption of the orphan children, abandoned children, and the surrendered children, right? Through some sort of a procedural, with recognized adoption agencies, right? So here the recognized adoption agencies are basically registered with the Central Adoption Resource Authority, and only through that channel the adoption of the children will be done. So it is basically done with respect to, in accordance with the Hague Convention on the inter-country adoption that was adopted in 1993, and the government of India also ratified this Hague Convention on the inter-country adoption. So this Hague Convention on the protection of the children and the cooperation of with respect to the inter-country adoption, right, is basically a convention that lays down the two basic principles towards the protection of the children, okay, who are subjected to the international adoption, right? Here the establishing of the safeguards to ensure that transnational adoption is in the best interest of the children, okay, and to establish a system of the cooperation between the states or between the countries to ensure that the safeguards are basically well respected. Okay, so India is basically India has ratified this convention. Now India has legally bound to adopt the children through the Central Adoption Resource Authority. If not, it will be considered as a violation to those Hague conventions also. Okay, here the most important aspect is that there is a mandatory registration of this these bodies which are linking to the Central Adoption Resource Authorities, right? So any such any such the bodies or any such bodies which are involved in some sort of adoption of the children's, right, will have to be compulsorily registered with the Central Adoption Resource Authority under the Juvenile Justice Care and the Protection Act 2015. And this body, Central Adoption Resource Authority, was set up in 1990, and recently in 2018 the Central Adoption Resource Authority have allowed, right, the individuals who are living in live-in relationship, that means without marrying they can also adopt the children, right, from within India, right. In that respect, it was a significant move, and currently at the headquarters of the Central Adoption Resource Authority is located in New Delhi. All right. So here the Central Adoption Resource Authority, which is a statutory body set up under the Ministry of Women and Child Welfare, Government of India. Okay. Mango, the mango is also considered, the king of fruits. So recently, to boost the mango exports from the eastern region, specifically from Bihar, from West Bengal, right, as well as the neighboring, states, right, the 16 varieties of the mangoes have recently been included into the geographical indication tags. So here the GI tag would definitely help this mango exports from the eastern region, from the Bihar, from the West Bengal, right, to the other nations, right. Recently these mangoes or these varieties of the mangoes known as Khiraspasti and the Lakshman Bhog, right, these two varieties of the mango from the West Bengal, the Zardalu varieties of the mango from the Bihar is being exported to the Bahrain. Here the Bahrain is basically the kingdom of the Bahrain, which is located in the Persian Gulf. Okay, this nation, or it is also basically called island nation because it comprises the small archipelagos made up of 70 natural islands. So it's a island archipelago, or it's an island nation. So it's consisting of the 70 natural islands, right? And it is centered around the Bahrain Island, which makes up around 83% of the country's landmass. Okay, so mango in India is also referred of the king of the fruits, and it also referred as the Kalp Vraksh. Kalp Vraksh means the wish granting tree, right? That if you seek any wish, that will be fulfilled, right? That is given in ancient scriptures in our country, right? And most of the states where the mango plantations are done, right? For example, the Uttar Pradesh, Andhra Pradesh, where the maximum plantation related to the mango is there. It has been followed by the Telangana, Karnataka, and Bihar have the major share of the total production of this fruit. Okay, there are a lot of varieties of the mango, right? The important varieties, right, for the purpose of the exports are Alfonso, Kesar, Totapuri, and the Baganpalli, right, which are also the geographical indication tagged, right? And these are the important varieties which are exported, right, to the various countries. And mango exports are primarily taken in the three forms, that is, a fresh mango, or the mango pulp, or the mango slice. These are the three forms through which the mangoes are exported to the other countries from the country called India. Okay. Next, the groundnuts. Groundnuts, everybody would have, you know, experienced the groundnut or would have tasted the groundnut. So here, the groundnut production was good in our country in the financial year 2020-21. It was almost 101.19 lakh ton of the groundnut was basically produced in our country. So in order to boost this groundnut exports from the eastern region, again from the Bihar, from the West Bengal, a consignment of around 24 metric tons of the groundnuts have been recently been exported to the Nepal, right, from the West Bengal. So here, the most important aspect is, right, as per the recent estimates of the oilseed production, right, by the Ministry of Agriculture and the Farmers Welfare, the groundnut production in the financial year 2020 and 21 was around 101 lakh tons. It was also greater than the last year or the previous years in the financial year 2019-20 when the groundnut production was just 99.52 lakh tons. The major production region or major production state of the groundnuts are basically the Gujarat. The Gujarat is also considered the largest producer of the groundnut in the country, which is closely followed by the Rajasthan, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, West Bengal, and these are other states which are also producing the groundnuts in our country. The crop is grown in both Kharif and the Rabi season. The Kharif season, as you know, the Kharif crops are basically grown or shown early, in the month of May, right? Usually at the beginning of the first monsoonal rain. At the beginning of the first monsoonal rain, the Rabi season or Rabi seasonal crops, the Rabi crops are basically sown around mid-November, preferably just after the monsoonal rains. So the Kharif season basically accounted for the share of around 75% of the total production. That means 75% of the groundnut production basically occurred during the Kharif season when the crops are basically sown early in the month of May, usually at the beginning of the first monsoonal rain. Traditionally, the Gujarat and Rajasthan are basically having the major share, or they are also the largest producer of the groundnut in our country. Okay, the groundnut export from the West Bengal, right, definitely will boost the export potential of the groundnut from our country. Okay, so this is the groundnut. Okay, next, the Rengma. Rengma is basically a Naga tribe, right, which is also there in the state of Assam and the Nagaland, right. Here recently, the Rengma Nagas have recently written to the Union Home Minister Amit Shah demanding the autonomous district council for them, right. It is, with that respect of that backdrop is that the central and the state government is trying to upgrade the Karbi Anglong Autonomous Council, where these Rangma Nagas are basically also living over there, to the territorial council, right? That is being renamed as the Karbi Anglong Autonomous Territorial Council. Despite of that, these Rangma Nagas in the Assam is basically demanding, right, a separate autonomous district council for their purpose, right? Here, the Rangma Naga Peoples Council, okay, which is basically a registered body consisting of the Rangma Nagas, right, have recently been written to the Union Home Minister demanding that the Rangmas are basically the first tribal people in the state of Assam who have first encountered the British or the British Army in 1839. Okay, and in existing Rangma Hills, right, which are recently been eliminated from the political map of the state, where in place of this, it was replaced by the Mikir Hills, or it is now also known as the Karbi Anglong. The Karbi Anglong is basically, a region in the state of Assam, right, in the state of Assam and Meghalaya. So recently, it has been replaced, or this Rangma Hills recently been replaced by this Mikir Hills, right, which is also the most important aspect. Also, the demand from the Rangma Nagas. Okay, and the Rangmas also demanding that it was during the Burmese invasion, right, in the state of Assam, the Rangmas tribes or the Rangma Nagas basically gave the shelter to the Ahom refugees. So it has also contributed to the state of Assam. Okay, and during the partition, when the partition was held in 1963 between the state of Assam and Nagaland, when basically the distribution, or when basically reorganization of the state was basically occurring in 1963, right? That was between the state of Assam and Nagaland. What was happens is that the Rangma state was, or Rangma Hills was also partitioned. Okay, and at the time of creation of the Nagaland state, right, who were also known as at that point of the time was the Mikir Hills till 1976, which is basically consisting of the indigenous tribal people of the Mikir Hills, right? Now, thus you can say that the Rangma Hills and the Mikir Hills were basically two separate entities till 1951. Karvis have no history in the Rangma Hills, right? And the people who are presently living in the Rangma Hills are basically the people from the state of Assam, including the state of Arunachal Pradesh and the Meghalaya, right? They speak different languages, right? And do not know the Karvi languages of Karvi Anglong, right? Still, there are around 12 lakh population belongs to the Karbi Anglong Autonomous Council, right? Where the 12 lakh belongs to these people. The Karbis only constituted only 3 lakh people. Remaining are non-Karbis, okay, and including the Rangma Nagas, whose population is just around a few thousands only, right? They demanded the separate autonomous council, as well as they also demanded the separate legislative seat specifically for the purpose of Rangmas. So the Rangma is basically a tribe in the state of Assam and the Nagaland. I have told you in 2011, the census population, their population is just 62,000 only. The Negada festival is celebrated by the basically the tribe called the Rengma tribe, which is basically also called the agricultural season or harvest season, right? This Negada is basically celebrated just after the harvest in the month of November. Okay, Operation Pangia, 14th. So Operation Pangia 14 is basically is an operation which was recently been launched by the Interpol. The Interpol is International Criminal Police Organization, which is also commonly known as Interpol. Okay, and it basically facilitates the worldwide police cooperation as well as the crime control across the country. So basically, the Interpol, with the help of other nations, right, control the crime specifically in the world. So here, the Operation Penja, the 14, which was recently been launched, right, as a basically an operation for controlling the fake online pharmacies, right? There are a lot of fake online pharmacies which are selling the medicines, right? Which are basically, some medicines are basically not made as per the authoritative jurisdiction, but they are illegally made. So these, through with the help of these fake online pharmacies, there was fake medicines were sold to the people, right? The number of such fake online pharmacies have been recently been shut down, right, with the help of this Operation Pangia, right? So here, lot of counterfeit and illicit medicines are basically sold with the help of these online pharmacies. Recently, thousands of such online pharmacies have been shut down, right? In 92 countries, where the countries basically participated along with Interpol. So here, the Indian agencies or Indian nodal agency known as the Central Bureau of Investigation participated, right, with the Interpol, right, to control such online pharmacies, right, specifically to control such type of illicit, as well as the counterfeit medicine sale, right, during such online pharmacies sale. Okay, so which basically resulted into the shutting down of around 1.1 lakh web links throughout the world. Throughout the world means in the 92 countries, right, where almost the marketplace is basically sold related to such type of illicit and the counterfeit medicines over such counters, over such online counters. So here, other aspect of this Operation Penja is related to the raising of the public awareness related to the potential dangers, right, that they are buying from the online pharmacies, right, which is also the most important aspect of Operation Penja. So you can see that the Operation Penja, which is related to the bringing down of such fake online pharmacies which are selling such counterfeit and illicit medicines around the world. So around 1,13,000 web links which are related to the online pharmacies are basically shut down. There are around 277 people also arrested during this operation. Okay, 92 countries basically participated, right? And here 23 million US dollars worth of the COVID test, mask, antibodies, right, and as well as other related associated fake and counterfeit illicit medicine are being basically recovered. Okay, and around 7 lakh 10,000 packages being checked through this Interpol operation. Okay. Next and last and most important news is the QS World University Ranking 2022. Here, the QS World University Ranking is basically provided by the Quakerley Simmons, which is a British company which basically provided such type of ranking across the world universities, specifically in the undergraduation level. So it basically analyzes the higher education institutions around the world. Okay, so this year in 2022, for the purpose of 2022, the QS World University Ranking shows that there are three Indian universities basically makes up to the top 200 top universities in the world. They are IIT Bombay, IIT Delhi, and basically IISc Bangalore. Okay, here recently the Jawaharlal Nehru University also entered into the top 1000 spot of the QS World University ranking this year, right? It is because the Jawaharlal Nehru University also introduced the new program, that is undergraduate engineering program. Because till now the JNU is basically the top most research institutions in the level of the postgraduate level, right? In the level of PGs and then the PhD programs. But recently they have also introduced the undergraduate engineering program, and because of that the JNU also entered into the QS World University ranking this year. Okay. So top 5 universities in the world according to the QS World University ranking is: the first is MIT, which is located in the Cambridge in the USA. The second is University of Oxford, which is located in the UK, London. The third is Stanford University, which is located in the USA. The fourth is Cambridge University, again UK. And the fifth is basically the Harvard University in the USA. Right? In the Indian scenario, you can understand that no Indian university or no Indian institute basically featured in the top 100 universities in the world in the list of QS World University ranking. But but there are around 22 Indian institutions which are featured in the top 1000 list, right? As compared to the 21 last year. That means 22 Indian institutes basically featured or came into the top 1000, the institutions in this QS World University ranking. The IIT Bombay, which is the topmost Indian university, or topmost the institution, also featured in the top 200 positions in the QS World University ranking. So this year, the IIT Bombay basically stood right at the ranking of basically 177 spot, though it has fell the 5 places when you compare with the last year's ranking. IIT Delhi stood at 185th position or 185th rank. Okay, and overall IISc or Indian Institute of Sciences, which is located in the Bangalore, stood at 186th position. So all three institutions, IIT Bombay stood at 177th spot, IIT Delhi stood at 185th spot, and IISc Bangalore basically stood at 186th spot. Okay, and the IISc also declared the topmost research university when you basically adjusted to the faculty side. That means the most number of citations per faculty basically highest in IISc Bangalore. Okay, other universities like Aligarh Muslim University, Banaras Hindu Universities, Amrita Vishwa Vidyapeetham are no longer featured in the top 1000 universities in the world. They have just moved to the band of 1000 to 1200 rankings of the university. So they are not featured in the top 1000 universities in our country. Okay, here 2020 global rank, you can understand is that 177, that is the rank which is given to the Indian Institute of Technology Bombay. 185th rank given to the Indian Institute of Technology Delhi or IIT Delhi. 186th rank backed by the Indian Institute of Science Bangalore. And IIT Madras this year stood at 255th spot, right, which has improved its ranking right from the last year. So the 255th spot is given to the IIT Madras, 277th spot given to the IIT Kanpur this year. Okay, 280 spot given to IIT Kharagpur, 395 ranking given to the IIT Guwahati, 400 ranking given to the IIT Roorkee, right? And the University of Delhi basically came in this ranking band of 501 to 510, right? And the JNU this year features in the band of 561 to 570 ranking band. So you can understand that the Indian Institute of Technology predominantly came into the topmost universities, right, from India in the world, right? They also feature almost, you see, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, almost top seven, the older IITs, IIT Bombay, IIT Delhi, IIT Madras, IIT Kanpur, IIT Kharagpur, IIT Guwahati, IIT Roorkee. They are featured at the topmost Indian universities in the QS World University ranking, right? We also needed, the funding mechanism, innovative funding mechanism, as well as, the various infrastructural facilities in the IITs in order to improve their rankings in the world. If the government of India provides such type of innovative funding mechanisms to the IITs, definitely our IITs will be reaching to the top 10 institutes in the world in the near future. All right. That's all for today. Thank you very much. We'll meet again tomorrow. Be safe. Be at your home. Thank you very much.